The sound of gunshots echoed across the dusty plains as Madeline Avery ran for her life, her tattered dress catching on brambles and her bare feet bleeding from the sharp rocks that littered the unforgiving terrain of the Arizona Territory. It was 1875, and she had never imagined her life would come to this desperate moment, fleeing from a man who had once promised her the world, but delivered only pain and betrayal. The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly on her exposed shoulders, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins as she stumbled forward. Each labored breath burned her lungs, and the bruises that covered her arms and face throbbed with every heartbeat. Behind her, in the distance, she could hear the angry shouts of Emmett Walsh and his gang of outlaws. They were gaining on her, and Madeline knew she couldn't outrun them for much longer. Her foot caught on a hidden rock, sending her sprawling face first into the dirt. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, only to collapse again, a whimper escaping her cracked lips. Dust clung to the tears that streaked down her face as she crawled forward, desperate to put distance between herself and the men pursuing her. "I see her." A gruff voice called out, too close for comfort. "She's just over that ridge." Madeline closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. She had no weapons, no strength left, nowhere to hide in this vast, open landscape. She had fled Philadelphia 3 months ago seeking a new beginning, only to find herself at the mercy of men who saw her as nothing but property. The thunder of hoofbeats approached, and Madeline tensed, ready for the worst. But instead of multiple horses and the jeers of Walsh's men, she heard only a single rider coming from a different direction. She opened her eyes to see a cloud of dust rising from the east, while her pursuers were still to the south. A lone horse and rider appeared, silhouetted against the harsh sun. The stranger pulled his mount to a stop just yards from where she lay, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. His face was partially hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in stubble and piercing eyes that assessed her situation in seconds. "Looks like you're in a spot of trouble, madam," he said, his voice low and steady. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn leather vest, and dust-covered trousers tucked into scuffed boots. A gun belt hung at his hip, the revolver in its holster looking well used but meticulously maintained. "Please," Madeline whispered, her throat parched from running. "They're coming." The man glanced in the direction of the approaching shouts, then back to Madeline. Without hesitation, he moved toward her, kneeling to assess her condition. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her bruises and bleeding feet. "Name's Yates Blackburn," he said simply, then carefully slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back. "I reckon whoever did this to you doesn't deserve to find you again." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his chestnut mare. With gentle but efficient movements, he placed her in the saddle, then swung up behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist, holding her securely against him. "Hold on tight," he murmured against her ear, and then they were moving, the horse accelerating beneath them with powerful strides. Madeline glanced back to see Walsh and 2 of his men cresting the ridge, their faces contorting with rage when they spotted her. Gunshots rang out, but they were already out of range, Yates's horse eating up the distance with impressive speed. "They won't catch us," Yates assured her, guiding his horse into a narrow canyon that would hide their trail. "Delilah here is the fastest mare in 3 counties." Madeline sagged against him, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally ebbing away, leaving only exhaustion and pain. "Thank you," she managed to say before darkness claimed her. When Madeline awoke, she found herself lying on a simple but clean bed in a small cabin. A lantern cast a warm glow over rough-hewn log walls, decorated with a few practical items: a rifle mounted on pegs, a calendar from 1874, and a mirror with a crack running through its center. The scent of coffee and something cooking filled the air, and for a moment she felt an unexpected sense of safety. She tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through her body. Looking down, she noticed her feet had been cleaned and bandaged, and someone had covered her with a patchwork quilt. She was still wearing her torn dress, though a worn flannel shirt had been draped over her shoulders. "Take it slow," came Yates's voice from across the room. He stood by a small cook stove, stirring something in a cast iron pot. "You've been out since yesterday afternoon." "Yesterday?" Madeline's voice cracked. "What time is it now?" "Just past dawn," he replied, pouring water from a kettle into a cup. He crossed the room and offered it to her. "Here, you're probably parched." Madeline accepted the cup with trembling hands, sipping the water gratefully. Now that she could see him clearly, she noted that Yates Blackburn was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years outdoors and dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar. His eyes were a striking blue, watching her with a mixture of concern and caution. "Thank you for helping me," she said softly. "Those men, they would have killed me." Yates nodded once. "No need to thank me for basic human decency, madam. Though I admit I'm curious what a lady like yourself did to earn such determined pursuit." Madeline looked down at her hands, noticing the dirt still embedded beneath her fingernails. "My name is Madeline Avery. I came west from Philadelphia after my parents died, hoping to make a new start. I had some money saved and an offer of employment from a woman who ran a boarding house in Tucson." She paused, swallowing hard. "The stagecoach was robbed on the way. Emmett Walsh and his gang took everything, killed the driver and 2 other passengers. They took me." Yates's expression darkened. "Walsh has been terrorizing this territory for years. The law can't seem to catch up to him." "I was held at their camp for nearly 2 weeks, Madeline continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yesterday, while they were distracted by a card game, I managed to slip away. I ran as far as I could, but—" She gestured helplessly at her battered body. Yates turned back to the stove, giving her a moment to compose herself. When he returned, he carried a bowl of simple stew. "You need to eat, get your strength back. Then we can figure out what to do next." As Madeline ate, savoring the simple but nourishing food, Yates moved about the cabin, gathering supplies and occasionally checking out the window. His movements were efficient, purposeful, like a man accustomed to being prepared for anything. "This is your home?" she asked, trying to divert her thoughts from the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. Yates shook his head. "Just a line shack I use when I'm working this part of the range. My ranch is about 15 miles north of here." "You're a rancher." "Started with just 20 acres and 10 head of cattle 7 years ago. Now I've got close to 1,000 acres and a decent herd." There was quiet pride in his voice, but no boasting. "Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Madeline nodded, understanding the value of having something to call your own. "Are we safe here, from Walsh, I mean?" "For now," Yates replied, "but he's not one to give up easily. Once you're well enough to travel, I'll take you to my main ranch. It's more defensible, and I've got a couple of hands there who can help keep watch." Madeline set down her empty bowl, a new worry settling over her. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "You've already done more than enough, Miss Avery," Yates interrupted gently. "Emmett Walsh has been a problem in this territory long before you came along. If anything, you've given me more reason to deal with him once and for all." There was something in his tone that made Madeline study him more closely. "You've crossed paths with him before." It wasn't a question, but Yates answered anyway. 3 years ago, his gang raided a neighboring ranch while I was away in town, killed the owner, his wife, and their son. Good people. Friends. His jaw tightened. The territorial marshal formed a posse, but Walsh disappeared into the Badlands. He's been in and out of the territory since then, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law. Madeline felt a chill despite the warmth of the cabin. "And now I've led him to your doorstep." Yates shook his head. "Like I said, he was already my problem. Rest now. We'll leave at dusk when there's less chance of being spotted crossing open country." For the rest of the day, Madeline drifted in and out of sleep while Yates kept watch, cleaned his weapons, and occasionally stepped outside to check their surroundings. He provided her with clean water to wash and a spare shirt and trousers that were much too big but far more practical than her ruined dress. As the sun began to set, Casting long shadows through the cabin's single window, Yates saddled his horse and packed their few supplies. He helped Madeline stand, supporting her weight as she tested her injured feet. "The bandages will help, but it's still going to hurt," he warned. "Can you make it to the horse?" Determined not to be a burden, Madeline nodded. "I can manage." With Yates's arm around her waist, she limped outside. The air had cooled with the approaching night, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Delilah, the chestnut mare, stood patiently waiting, her ears flicking toward them as they approached. Just as Yates was helping Madeline onto the horse, a distant sound caught his attention. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the horizon. "What is it?" Madeline whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "Riders, at least 3, maybe 4. Yates's voice was calm, but his hand moved to rest on his holstered revolver. "Coming from the south." "Walsh," Madeline breathed, knowing instinctively it couldn't be anyone else. "How did they find us?" "This territory isn't as big as it seems when you know how to track," Yates replied, quickly adjusting their plan. "Change of plans, we need to move now and fast." He lifted Madeline onto Delilah's back, then mounted behind her in one smooth motion. With a gentle squeeze of his heels, they set off, keeping to the shadows as they followed a rocky path that wound north through the foothills. They rode in silence, both straining to hear if they were being followed. After about an hour, when they reached the crest of a hill, Yates pulled Delilah to a stop and turned to look back the way they had come. In the distance, pinpricks of light revealed their pursuers' torches moving through the darkness. "They're still coming," Madeline said, her voice tight with fear. "But they don't know exactly where we are," Yates replied. "And night riding in this terrain is dangerous for those who don't know it well." They continued on, Yates guiding them through narrow passes and dry creek beds, always keeping to the hardest ground where they would leave the fewest tracks. Madeline found herself impressed by his knowledge of the land. The way he navigated confidently, even in the darkness with only the moon and stars to light their way. As they rode, Madeline became increasingly aware of the solid warmth of Yates's chest against her back, the strength in the arm that occasionally tightened around her waist when they navigated difficult terrain. Despite her circumstances, she couldn't help but notice how different he was from the men she'd encountered since leaving Philadelphia. There was a quiet dignity to him, a sense of purpose and integrity that had become rare in her experience. When the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, Yates guided them into a dense copse of trees nestled in a small valley. A stream bubbled nearby, providing water for Delilah after their long night's journey. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Yates said, helping Madeline down from the horse, her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the hours of riding. "My ranch is still another 6 hours' ride, but we've put good distance between us and Walsh." He spread a blanket on the ground beneath a large cottonwood tree, then helped Madeline sit. After tending to Delilah, he joined her, offering jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "Not exactly a fine dining experience," he said with a hint of a smile, the first she'd seen from him. "It's perfect," Madeline replied honestly, realizing how hungry she was. As they ate in companionable silence, she studied his profile in the growing light. "May I ask you something, Mr. Blackburn?" "Yates, please, and yes, you may." "Why are you doing this?" "Risking your life, your ranch, everything for a stranger." Yates was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. "My pa used to say that a man is defined not by what he does when things are easy, but by what he does when they're hard." He looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "I couldn't ride away and leave you to Walsh, it's as simple as that." Madeline held his gaze, seeing the truth in his words. "I don't think it's simple at all. I think it's rather extraordinary." A faint flush colored Yates's cheeks, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her praise. "Get some rest, Miss Avery. We've still got a long way to go." "Madeline, please," she corrected gently. He nodded once. "Madeline, then." While Yates kept watch, Madeline curled up on the blanket and fell into an exhausted sleep. Her dreams were troubled, filled with the faces of Walsh and his men, but each time fear threatened to overwhelm her, a sense of security would return the feeling of strong arms around her, carrying her to safety. She woke to Yates gently shaking her shoulder. The sun was high overhead now, filtering through the leaves above them. "We should move on," he said. "How are your feet feeling?" Madeline sat up, wiggling her toes experimentally. "Better, I think, still sore, but the bandages helped." Yates nodded and offered her his canteen. As she drank, he packed up their small camp, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Madeline noticed that despite his calm demeanor, he was constantly alert, his hand never far from his weapon. "You think they're still following us?" she asked as he helped her stand. "Walsh isn't one to give up easily," Yates replied, "but we've covered our tracks well. If we're lucky, they're searching in the wrong direction by now." They mounted Delilah once more and continued their journey northward. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed from rough, rocky terrain to more open grasslands dotted with stands of trees. Cattle appeared occasionally, grazing in the distance, some bearing a brand that Madeline now recognized as Yates's, a simple ib connected by a horizontal line. "We're on your land now," she asked, noting how his posture had relaxed slightly. "For the last hour or so," he confirmed. "My nearest neighbor is old Samuel Thornton, 3 miles east, good man, raising horses mostly." Madeline tried to imagine what it would be like to own so much land, to have the freedom to build something from nothing as Yates had done. In Philadelphia, her world had been confined to a modest townhouse and the rigid social expectations that governed a young woman's life. Even before her parents' deaths, she had longed for something different, something more authentic than the superficial society she'd been raised in. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, noticing her silence. "How different your life is from what mine was," she admitted. "I spent most of my days learning to be a proper lady, how to pour tea correctly, how to make polite conversation, how to sit and stand and walk in ways that would attract a suitable husband." She laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. "None of which has proven particularly useful out here." "I don't know about that," Yates replied. "You survived Walsh's camp and managed to escape. That takes more courage and wit than pouring tea ever will." Madeline hadn't thought of it that way. "I suppose you're right. Though I'd still trade all my embroidery skills for the ability to shoot straight or ride a horse properly." "Those can be learned," Yates said simply. "Courage can't be taught." They crested a gentle hill, and Yates reined Delilah to a halt. Before them stretched a picturesque valley, and in its center stood a ranch house not large or grand by Eastern standards, but substantial and well-built, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings surrounded it, a barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a small cookhouse. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, and even from this distance, Madeline could see figures moving about, tending to the daily tasks of ranch life. "Home," Yates said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. "It's not much compared to what you're used to in Philadelphia. It's beautiful," Madeline interrupted sincerely. After everything she'd been through, the neat, orderly ranch looked like paradise. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. When he recognized Yates, he raised an arm in greeting, then called out to someone behind him. By the time they reached the yard, 3 men stood waiting the ranch hands Yates had mentioned. Yates dismounted first, then reached up to help Madeline down. Her legs wobbled after the long ride, and his hands lingered at her waist until he was sure she was steady. "Boys, this is Miss Madeline Avery," Yates said to the waiting men. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Avery, this is Daniel Cooper, my foreman." He indicated a tall, lean man with graying hair and weathered features. "And these 2 troublemakers are the Johnson brothers, Thomas and Frank." The Johnson brothers tipped their hats in unison. They were clearly siblings, sharing the same sandy hair and friendly expressions, though Thomas appeared to be the elder by a few years. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Avery," Daniel said, his eyes taking in her bandaged feet and bruised face with a quick, assessing glance. "You look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." "That sounds wonderful," Madeline admitted, suddenly aware of how she must appear dressed in clothes too large for her, dirty from travel, her hair a tangled mess. "Thomas, take care of Delilah," Yates instructed. She's earned extra grain tonight. Frank, let Mrs. Pearson know we have a guest who will be needing accommodation." As the younger men hurried to comply, Yates turned to Daniel. "Any trouble while I was gone? Nothing unusual. That new bull you bought is settling in well with the herd." Daniel hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "There was a rider yesterday asking questions in town about a woman matching Miss Avery's description. Sheriff Holt sent word." Yates's expression hardened. "Walsh's men?" Daniel nodded. "Likely. Sheriff ran him off, but said to warn you they might be sniffing around. Double the watch tonight," Yates decided. "And tomorrow we'll bring in the herd closer to the ranch house. I don't want anyone caught out alone on the range if Walsh and his gang are in the area." While they spoke, Frank had returned with an older woman in tow, stout and gray-haired, with a no-nonsense demeanor softened by kind eyes. "So this is the young lady," she said, approaching Madeline with an appraising look that quickly turned sympathetic. "You poor dear, I'm Mrs. Pearson, the housekeeper. Let's get you inside and properly taken care of." Before Madeline could respond, Mrs. Pearson had taken gentle hold of her elbow and was guiding her toward the house. Madeline glanced back at Yates, who gave her an encouraging nod. "You're in good hands with Mrs. Pearson," he assured her. "I need to see to a few things, but I'll join you for supper." The main house was as well kept inside as it appeared from the outside. The furniture was simple but sturdy, the floors swept clean, and everything had a place. Mrs. Pearson led Madeline to a bedroom at the back of the house, small but comfortable, with a real bed, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a window overlooking a kitchen garden. "This was meant to be the mistress's room," Mrs. Pearson explained as she poured warm water from a kettle into the basin. "Not that there's been a mistress since Mr. Blackburn built the place. He's not one for town socials or courting, that man." She helped Madeline out of the borrowed clothes and into a copper-hip bath that two of the ranch hands brought in, filled with steaming water. The warm bath was heavenly after days of grime and fear, and Madeline nearly cried with relief as she sank into it. "Now, let's have a look at those injuries," Mrs. Pearson said, carefully unwrapping the bandages from Madeline's feet. She clucked her tongue at the sight. "Nasty business, but healing clean. No infection, thank goodness." As Madeline bathed, Mrs. Pearson bustled about, producing a simple but clean dress that she said had belonged to her niece. "She's about your size, and she left it here last time she visited. It'll do until we can get your own things sorted." Once cleaned, dressed, and with fresh bandages on her feet, Madeline felt almost human again. Mrs. Pearson brushed and braided her hair, all the while keeping up a steady stream of conversation that required little response from Madeline, for which she was grateful. The older woman seemed to understand instinctively that what Madeline needed most was normalcy and kindness, not questions about her ordeal. "There now," Mrs. Pearson said finally, patting Madeline's shoulder. "You look like a proper young lady again. Supper will be ready in an hour. You rest until then." Left alone, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the clean quilt. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly safe. The ranch house was solid, the people kind, and Yates Blackburn was unlike any man she had ever known. He had rescued her without hesitation, protected her without demanding anything in return, and brought her into his home when he could have simply delivered her to the nearest town. She found herself wondering about him, what had brought him to this remote place, what had shaped him into the man he was. There was a sadness about him sometimes, a shadow that crossed his features when he thought she wasn't looking. The sound of boots on the porch interrupted her thoughts. Through her window, she could see Yates speaking with Daniel, their expressions serious. They were discussing something important, likely the threat that Walsh and his men posed. Madeline felt a stab of guilt, knowing she had brought this danger to these good people. When supper time arrived, Mrs. Pearson helped Madeline to the dining room where a table was set for four. Yates entered from outside, freshly washed, his damp hair combed back from his face. He looked different somehow, still the same man who had rescued her, but in this setting, his role as the owner of this prosperous ranch was more apparent. "Miss Avery," he greeted her with a slight bow, "you're looking much recovered. Thanks to Mrs. Pearson's care." Madeline replied, smiling at the housekeeper. Daniel joined them as well, and soon they were seated around a meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread that put the Line Shack's simple stew to shame. The conversation was deliberately kept light, focusing on ranch matters and local news rather than the dangerous situation that had brought Madeline here. As they ate, Madeline observed the easy rapport between Yates and his foreman. Daniel clearly respected his employer, but there was a friendship there too, a bond that spoke of shared experiences and mutual trust. "Mrs. Pearson tells me you're from Philadelphia," Daniel said during a lull in the conversation. "That's a long way to travel alone." "My parents died within months of each other last year," Madeline explained. "There was little left after their debts were settled and no real reason to stay. I had always wanted to see more of the country, so when I received a letter from an acquaintance about a position at a boarding house in Tucson, it seemed like providence." "And instead, you found trouble," Yates said quietly. Madeline nodded. "The stagecoach was attacked just a day's journey from Tucson. I sometimes wonder if the boarding house position was even real, or if it was just a way to lure young women out here." "There are unscrupulous operations that do exactly that," Daniel confirmed grimly. "Though most decent folk in these parts try to put a stop to it when they can." "Like you did," Madeline said, looking at Yates. A faint flush colored his cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Madeline said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't have." After supper, while Mrs. Pearson cleared the table, Yates invited Madeline to join him on the porch. The evening was pleasant, a cool breeze offsetting the lingering heat of the day. They sat in rocking chairs, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. "I've been thinking about your situation," Yates said after a comfortable silence. "Once you're fully recovered, I can arrange transportation to Tucson if that's still where you wish to go, or to any other town where you might have prospects." The thought of leaving the safety of the ranch filled Madeline with unexpected dread. "And in the meantime, I don't wish to impose on your hospitality indefinitely. You're welcome here as long as you need," Yates assured her. "As for Walsh and his men, I've sent word to the territorial marshal about your escape. With luck, they'll organize a proper search this time." "And if they don't?" Madeline asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at her since their arrival. "What if Walsh comes here?" Yates's expression turned grim. "Then he'll find me and my men ready for him. This isn't an isolated Line Shack, Madeline. This is my home, and I protect what's mine." The possessive note in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through Madeline, not of fear, but something entirely different. She looked away, unsure how to respond to the intensity in his eyes. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything." Yates nodded, then changed the subject, pointing out constellations in the night sky and telling her about the seasonal patterns that guided ranching life. His deep knowledge of the land and its rhythms impressed Madeline, reminding her again how different his world was from the one she had left behind. As the night grew cooler, they moved inside. Yates showed her to a small library adjacent to the main sitting room, a cozy space with shelves of books that surprised Madeline with their variety. "You didn't expect a rancher to read Shakespeare?" he asked, noticing her expression as she ran her fingers along the spines. Madeline smiled, embarrassed at being so transparent. "I'm learning not to make assumptions about anything or anyone out here." A wise approach. He selected a volume and handed it to her. Emerson's Essays, good reading for someone starting a new life. Their fingers brushed as she took the book, and Madeline felt a warmth spread up her arm at the contact. For a moment, neither moved, caught in a strange, suspended moment of connection. The sound of boots on the porch broke the spell. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "Ryder coming in, one of Samuel Thornton's boys, says he's got urgent news." Yates's relaxed demeanor vanished instantly. He nodded to Madeline. "Excuse me, please make yourself comfortable." She watched as he strode out with Daniel, his hand automatically checking his sidearm as he went. Through the window, she could see a young man on horseback, perhaps 16 or 17, gesticulating as he spoke to Yates. Whatever news he brought, it wasn't good. Yates's face darkened with each passing moment. When Yates returned, his expression was troubled. Samuel Thornton's ranch was hit by raiders this afternoon. They took horses, burned a barn, and left a message. He hesitated, clearly debating how much to tell her. "It was Walsh, wasn't it?" Madeline asked, already knowing the answer. Yates nodded grimly. "They told Thornton they were looking for a woman and the man who took her. Said they'd burn every ranch in the territory until they found her." Madeline's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing over her. "This is all because of me. I should leave, draw them away from here. No." Yates's voice was firm. "That's exactly what they want. You'd be playing into their hands." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Thornton's family is safe. They're on their way here now. I've sent the Johnson brothers to alert the other nearby ranches. We'll consolidate, present a unified defense." "But why would Walsh go to such lengths?" Madeline asked. "I'm nothing to him, just one woman who escaped." "It's not about you, not really," Yates explained, sinking into a chair across from her. "It's about his reputation. If word gets out that a woman escaped him and is alive to testify against him, it weakens his position. Other victims might come forward. The law might finally get the evidence they need." And then there was the unspoken truth that hung between them, that by rescuing her, Yates had made this personal. Walsh wouldn't stop now, not when his pride had been wounded. "I'm so sorry," Madeline whispered, tears threatening to spill. "You saved my life, and now I've endangered yours and everyone around you." Yates leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Listen to me, Madeline. You have nothing to apologize for. The only ones responsible for this are Walsh and his gang. They're the criminals, not you." His conviction was so strong that Madeline found herself nodding, drawing strength from his certainty. "What will you do now?" "Prepare," he said simply. "And when Walsh comes, because he will be ready for him." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for the possibility of attack. Samuel Thornton arrived with his wife, teenage son, and 2 daughters, all shaken by their close encounter with Walsh's gang. Other neighboring families joined them until the ranch house and bunkhouse were filled to capacity. Despite her injured feet, Madeline insisted on making herself useful, helping Mrs. Pearson with the increased cooking duties and assisting the other women in organizing supplies. She was touched by how readily these people had accepted her, treating her not as the cause of their troubles, but as one of their own who needed protection. Yates was everywhere at once, organizing watch rotations, positioning men at strategic points around the ranch, and making sure everyone knew what to do if an attack came. He carried the responsibility of protecting them all with a quiet dignity that only increased Madeline's admiration for him. On the 3rd evening, as Madeline was helping serve supper to the gathered families in the main house, she found herself working alongside Mary Thornton, Samuel's wife, a practical, no-nonsense woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "Yates Blackburn is a good man," Mary commented as they carried plates to the table. "One of the best in these parts." "Yes, he seems to be," Madeline agreed, glancing across the room to where Yates was deep in conversation with Samuel and 2 other ranchers. "He's been alone too long," Mary continued, giving Madeline a meaningful look. "Built this fine house, made this successful ranch, but has no one to share it with." Madeline felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Thornton, I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching," Mary interrupted with a knowing smile. "And the way you look at him, too." Before Madeline could respond, there was a commotion outside. Yates moved swiftly to the window, then to the door, his hand on his revolver. A moment later, he relaxed, opening the door to admit a dust-covered rider. "Marshal Dawson," he greeted the newcomer. "You made good time." The territorial marshal was a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and a badge pinned to his vest. He nodded to the assembled group. "Heard you folks were having some trouble with Emmett Walsh." "That's putting it mildly," Samuel Thornton said, stepping forward. "The bastard burned my north barn and stole 6 of my best horses." Marshal Dawson removed his hat, revealing sweat-matted hair. "I've been tracking Walsh and his gang for 3 days. They hit the Collins place yesterday, same story. They're working their way through the ranches looking for something." His eyes found Madeline, or someone. Yates made the introduction. This is Miss Madeline Avery. She escaped from Walsh's gang after they attacked her stagecoach and held her captive. The marshal's expression softened slightly as he took in Madeline's still healing bruises. "Madam, I'm sorry for what you've been through. Would you be willing to give a formal statement?" With a first-hand account of Walsh's crimes, I could get more men assigned to bring him in. Of course, Madeline agreed without hesitation. Anything that might help stop him. The conversation turned to strategies for dealing with Walsh, with the marshal confirming what they already suspected. The gang was methodically searching every ranch in the area, growing more desperate and violent with each failed attempt to find Madeline. "They've got about 10 men riding with them now," Dawson explained. "But they're spread thin, hitting different locations. If we can draw them into a confrontation where we have the advantage, we might end this once and for all." "You mean use Miss Avery as bait?" Yates said flatly, his disapproval evident. The marshal shook his head. "Not exactly. Just let word spread that she's here under protection. Walsh is arrogant, he'll come himself, thinking he can overpower whatever defense you've mounted. And when he does, we'll be waiting," Samuel added, warming to the plan. Madeline listened to the men discuss the details, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. When they finally reached an agreement on how to proceed, she spoke up. "I want to help." All eyes turned to her, some skeptical, others concerned. "You already are, by being willing to testify," Marshal Dawson assured her. "No, I mean actively help," Madeline clarified. "I know these men. I observed them for 2 weeks, their habits, their weaknesses. And they don't expect me to be anything but a helpless victim." Yates was already shaking his head. "It's too dangerous, with respect, Mr. Blackburn," Madeline interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "Danger found me the moment that stagecoach was attacked. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. I want to face this." A tense silence followed her words. Finally, the marshal nodded slowly. "The lady has a point. Knowledge of the enemy is valuable." Yates's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he turned to the marshal. "We do this my way, on my land. I won't risk anyone unnecessarily, especially not Miss Avery." The plan they devised was simple in concept but complex in execution. Word would be allowed to reach Walsh that Madeline was at the Blackburn Ranch, recovering from her injuries. The marshal would return to town, apparently giving up the search temporarily, but would actually position men at strategic points around the property. Meanwhile, the ranchers would prepare for a defense that would funnel Walsh and his men into a trap. As the meeting broke up and families headed to their assigned sleeping quarters, Yates beckoned Madeline to follow him outside. They walked to the edge of the porch, where the light from the house windows didn't quite reach, leaving them in semi-darkness beneath a star-filled sky. "I don't like this plan," Yates said without preamble, his voice low and tight with tension. "I know," Madeline replied, wrapping her arms around herself in the cool night air. "But it's the best chance to end this, isn't it?" Yates sighed heavily. "Probably. That doesn't mean I have to be happy about putting you at risk." "I'm already at risk," Madeline pointed out gently. "We all are, at least this way we choose the battlefield." He turned to her then, his expression difficult to read in the darkness. "When I found you in the dirt that day, bruised and barefoot, running for your life, something changed for me. I knew I had to protect you, whatever it took." The raw emotion in his voice made Madeline's breath catch. "You did protect me. You saved my life." "And I'll keep protecting you," he promised, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. "When this is over." He trailed off, and Madeline found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something powerful and undeniable between them. "When this is over," she prompted softly. "When this is over, we'll talk about what comes next," he finished, his voice rough with unspoken feelings. "For now, I need you to promise me you'll be careful, follow the plan exactly." "I promise," Madeline agreed, understanding his concern. "I don't plan to face Walsh directly, I just want to help end his reign of terror." Yates nodded, seemingly satisfied with her assurance. For a moment longer they stood close together in the darkness, neither willing to break the fragile connection between them. Finally, Yates cleared his throat and stepped back. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." As Madeline lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her and the occasional footsteps of men patrolling outside, she thought about Yates Blackburn and the life he had built here. She thought about the way her heart raced when he was near, the feeling of safety in his arms, the respect he showed her that was so different from what she had known before. And for the first time since her parents' deaths, Madeline Avery allowed herself to hope for a future that included more than mere survival. The next day dawned clear and bright, belying the tension that permeated the ranch. Men moved with purpose, checking weapons, reinforcing defensive positions, and drilling on the signals that would coordinate their response when Walsh arrived. Women prepared food, bandages, and gathered items that could be used as makeshift weapons if necessary. Madeline spent the morning with Marshal Dawson, providing details about Walsh's men, their usual tactics, and the layout of their camp as she remembered it. The marshal was impressed by her recall and her calm approach to the dangerous situation. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Avery," he said as they concluded their discussion. "Most people who have been through what you have would be hiding in a corner, not helping to plan a counterattack." "I spent too long being afraid," Madeline replied. "I'd rather be doing something, even if it's frightening." By midday, everything was in place. Marshal Dawson and 4 deputies had hidden themselves at key points around the property, while the ranchers and ranch hands were positioned strategically to protect the main house and outbuildings. Women and children were gathered in the root cellar beneath the house, where they would be safest if shooting started. Yates found Madeline on the porch, where she was helping Mrs. Pearson prepare bandages. "It's time," he said quietly. The lookout spotted dust on the south road. A group of riders moving fast. Madeline's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her hands steady as she finished the bandage she was working on. "How many?" "At least 8, maybe more," Yates replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You should join the others in the cellar now, Mrs." Pearson gathered the medical supplies and hurried inside, but Madeline hesitated. "Yates, he turned to her, his expression softening despite the tension of the moment. "I know, but I need to know you're safe so I can focus on what's coming." Understanding his concern, Madeline nodded. She impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Be careful," something flickered in his eyes, a warmth, a promise. "I will." He squeezed her hand in return, then released it. "Go now." Madeline joined the other women in the root cellar, a sturdy space with thick walls and a heavy door. Mary Thornton made room for her on a bench, putting an arm around her shoulders in silent support. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. "The men know what they're doing," Mary assured her, though her own worry was evident in the tight lines around her mouth. "They've faced trouble before." "Not like this," Madeline couldn't help but reply. "Not because of me." Above them, they could hear boots on the floorboards as men moved into position. And then, more distantly, the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch yard. Madeline closed her eyes, picturing the scene unfolding above them, wishing she could see what was happening. In the ranch yard, Yates stood on the porch, flanked by Samuel Thornton and Daniel Cooper. All 3 men were armed but kept their hands carefully away from their weapons as the riders approached. Emmett Walsh led the group, instantly recognizable by his scarred face and the black hat with a rattlesnake band that had become his trademark. "Blackburn." Walsh called out, reining his horse to a stop several yards from the house. His men spread out behind him, hands hovering near their guns. "I hear you've been harboring something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Walsh," Yates replied evenly. "This is private property." "I suggest you move on," Walsh sneered, scanning the buildings with narrow eyes. "Where are all your hands, Blackburn, hiding, or did they run when they heard I was coming?" He leaned forward in his saddle. "I know the girl is here, Madeline Avery, pretty little thing with more spirit than sense." Yates's expression remained impassive, though his hand twitched slightly closer to his revolver. "If you're looking for Miss Avery, you might try the territorial marshal's office. I believe she's giving a full statement about your activities." A flash of uncertainty crossed Walsh's face, quickly replaced by anger. "You're lying. My sources say she's here under your protection." He straightened in his saddle, addressing his men without taking his eyes off Yates. "Search the house, bring her out." "That won't be happening," Yates said firmly. "You and your men need to leave. Now." Walsh laughed, the sound harsh in the tense air. "Or what? I count 8 of us against 3 of you. Bad odds, Blackburn." "You might want to count again," came Marshal Dawson's voice as he stepped from behind the corner of the house, his rifle trained on Walsh. Simultaneously, the other deputies revealed themselves from their hiding places, and several of the ranch hands appeared in the barn doorway, all armed and ready. Walsh's face darkened with fury as he realized he'd ridden into a trap. For a long, tense moment, no one moved, the air thick with the possibility of violence. Then Walsh slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Yates's face. "Well played," he acknowledged with a cold smile, "but this isn't over." In the next instant, chaos erupted. One of Walsh's men drew his gun with lightning speed, firing at the marshal. The shot went wide, but it was the signal for battle. Gunfire exploded from all directions as Walsh's gang and the defenders exchanged shots. Yates dove for cover behind a water trough, returning fire methodically. He caught glimpses of the marshal doing the same from the side of the house, while Samuel and Daniel had taken positions behind stacked crates on the porch. 3 of Walsh's men fell quickly, outmatched by the more numerous defenders. The remaining outlaws scrambled for whatever cover they could find, while Walsh himself wheeled his horse around, spurring it toward the barn in an attempt to escape. He's heading for the back. Yates shouted to the marshal, then broke from cover to pursue, keeping low and using the various structures for protection as he ran. In the root cellar, the women and children huddled together as the sounds of gunfire thundered above them. Madeline sat rigid with fear, not for herself but for Yates and the others risking their lives. Every shot made her flinch, every shout tightened the knot of dread in her stomach. "We should know what's happening," she said suddenly, standing up. "Madeline, no," Mary protested, grabbing her arm. "It's not safe. I can't just sit here while they're fighting because of me," Madeline insisted, pulling free. "I need to see." Before anyone could stop her, she climbed the short ladder to the cellar door and pushed it open just enough to peek through. The main room of the house was empty, though she could see movement through the windows, men running, taking cover, firing. The gunshots were less frequent now, which either meant the fight was winding down or the combatants were being more selective with their shots. Madeline slipped out of the cellar, ignoring Mary's urgent whispers to come back. She moved cautiously to a window, staying low to avoid being seen from outside. The ranch yard was a scene of chaos. 2 bodies lay motionless in the dirt, and she could see several of the defenders, including the marshal, converging on a group of Walsh's men who had taken cover behind an overturned wagon. But there was no sign of Yates or Walsh himself. A muffled shout from the back of the house drew her attention. Madeline hesitated only briefly before moving toward the sound, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. She reached the kitchen and peered out the back window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Walsh had apparently been cornered in the small space between the main house and a storage shed. He was on foot now, and facing him, partially hidden behind a rain barrel, was Yates. They were exchanging shots, each man trying to get a clear aim at the other. Madeline watched in horror as Walsh suddenly broke from his position, firing rapidly to force Yates to duck for cover. Instead of running away, however, Walsh charged directly toward the house, toward the very window where Madeline stood watching. She stumbled back, but it was too late. Walsh had seen her. With a triumphant snarl, he changed direction, heading for the back door that led into the kitchen. Panic seized Madeline. She looked frantically around the kitchen for a weapon, any weapon. Her hand closed around a heavy cast iron skillet hanging from a hook near the stove just as the door burst open. Walsh filled the doorway, his face twisted with rage and exertion, his gun trained on her. "There you are," he growled. "Been a lot of trouble, haven't you?" Madeline gripped the skillet tighter, forcing herself to meet his gaze despite the terror coursing through her. "It's over, Walsh. The marshal has your men surrounded. Then I've got nothing to lose, have I?" he replied, taking a step toward her. "But I'll have the satisfaction of making sure Blackburn finds what's left of you. Drop the gun, Walsh." Yates's voice came from behind the outlaw, deadly calm. He stood in the doorway, his revolver aimed at Walsh's back. "It's finished." Walsh froze, then slowly smiled. "Well, now, this is a problem. I've got my gun on your woman and you've got yours on me. Seems like we're at an impasse." "She's not worth dying for," Yates said evenly. "And you will die, make no mistake. The marshal is right behind me. There's no way out." Walsh's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Maybe, but I can still take her with me." His finger tightened on the trigger. In that moment, Madeline acted on pure instinct. She swung the skillet with all her might, striking Walsh's gun arm. The impact sent a shock up her arm, but it had the desired effect. Walsh's shot went wild, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling instead of in her. Before he could recover, Yates was on him, tackling the outlaw to the ground. The two men grappled fiercely, rolling across the kitchen floor, each trying to gain control of Walsh's dropped weapon. Madeline pressed herself against the wall, still clutching the skillet, watching in horror as Walsh managed to land a solid punch to Yates's jaw. The blow stunned Yates momentarily, giving Walsh the opportunity to reach the gun. He grabbed it and swung it toward Yates, triumph blazing in his eyes. "No," Madeline cried, launching herself forward with the skillet raised high. This time her aim was true. The heavy iron connected with the back of Walsh's head with a sickening thud. The outlaw collapsed instantly, the gun falling from his limp fingers. Yates scrambled to his feet, kicking the weapon well out of reach before checking Walsh's pulse. "He's alive," he confirmed grimly, "though he'll have one hell of a headache when he wakes up." Marshal Dawson appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a raised eyebrow. "Looks like you had things under control." His eyes moved to Madeline, still clutching the skillet. "Nice work, Miss Avery." Madeline hardly heard him. Now that the danger had passed, her legs were threatening to give way beneath her, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to set the skillet down before she dropped it. Yates was at her side in an instant, his strong arm around her waist, supporting her. "It's all right," he murmured close to her ear. "It's over. You're safe now." She turned into his embrace, burying her face against his chest as the full impact of what had happened washed over her. His arms tightened around her, one hand coming up to stroke her hair gently. "You shouldn't have left the cellar," he said, but there was no real reproach in his voice, only concern and something deeper, something that made Madeline's heart beat faster despite her lingering fear. "I couldn't stay there, not knowing what was happening to you," she admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. The marshal cleared his throat. "I'll take care of this trash," he said, nodding at Walsh's unconscious form. "The rest of his gang is either dead or in custody." "It's finished, Miss Avery. You won't have to worry about Emmett Walsh ever again." As Dawson hauled Walsh away, Yates kept his arm firmly around Madeline, guiding her to a chair. She sank into it gratefully, her legs finally giving way to the trembling that had threatened since the moment she saw Walsh at the window. "Are you hurt?" Yates asked, kneeling before her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Madeline shook her head. "Just shaken." She managed a weak smile. "Though I think my arms will be sore tomorrow from wielding Mrs. Pearson's skillet." Yates laughed, the sound rich with relief. "Remind me never to cross you in the kitchen." His levity broke the last of Madeline's tension, and she found herself laughing too, perhaps a bit hysterically. Yates took her hands in his thumbs rubbing soothingly across her knuckles until her laughter subsided into hiccuping breaths. "You were incredibly brave," he told her, his voice low and serious, "but please don't ever scare me like that again." The naked emotion in his voice caught Madeline by surprise. She looked into his eyes and saw what he was trying to tell her, that she had become more to him than just someone to protect. "I'll try not to," she promised softly, "though I can't regret helping to save you." Before Yates could respond, the kitchen filled with people, Mrs. Pearson and the other women emerging from the cellar, ranch hands and neighbors coming to check on the commotion in the house. Questions flew, exclamations of relief mingled with expressions of concern, and the moment between Madeline and Yates was lost in the chaos of aftermath. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The wounded were tended to thankfully. None of the defenders had been seriously hurt, though 2 of Walsh's men had been killed and several others injured. Marshal Dawson organized the transportation of the prisoners back to town, where they would await trial for their numerous crimes. By nightfall, an impromptu celebration had sprung up at the ranch. The threat that had hung over them for days was gone, and no one seemed eager to return to their own homes just yet. A bonfire blazed in the yard, food and drink were shared, and even a fiddle appeared, providing music that lifted spirits and eased the tension of the day's events. Madeline sat on a bench near the fire, watching the revelry with a sense of wonder. These people, many of whom she'd only just met, had risked their lives to protect her. They had made her one of their own in a way she had never experienced in Philadelphia society. "May I join you?" Yates asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Madeline smiled up at him, accepting one of the cups. "Of course." He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the dancers circling the fire, listening to the music and laughter that seemed so incongruous after the day's violence. "What will you do now?" Yates finally asked, his eyes on the fire rather than her face. "Will you continue to Tucson?" Madeline considered the question carefully. The boarding house position had likely been filled months ago, and she had no other connections in Tucson. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I haven't really had time to think about it." "You could stay," Yates said, his voice carefully neutral. "Here, I mean, the territory needs school teachers, and you're certainly educated. Or Mrs. Pearson has been talking about retiring soon. She thinks you'd make a fine housekeeper." Madeline turned to look at him, trying to read his expression in the flickering firelight. "Is that what you want?" "For me to be your housekeeper?" Yates met her gaze then, and the intensity in his blue eyes took her breath away. "No," he said simply, "that's not what I want." "What do you want?" Madeline asked, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. Instead of answering immediately, Yates set aside his coffee cup and took her hand in his. "When I found you that day, bruised and barefoot in the dirt, something inside me changed. I've spent 7 years building this ranch, making it successful, but it never felt like a true home until—" He paused, struggling for words. "Until you were here." Madeline's breath caught. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's too soon. You've been through a terrible ordeal and you need time to heal, to decide what you want for your future. But I want you to know that there's a place for you here if you choose it, not as a housekeeper or a school teacher, but as—" "As what?" Madeline prompted when he trailed off. Yates smiled ruefully. "I'm not very good at this. What I'm trying to say is that I care for you, Madeline Avery. More than I thought possible in such a short time, and if you need time, I'll wait. If you want to go to Tucson or back east or anywhere else, I'll help you get there safely. But I hope you'll consider staying." Madeline looked at their joined hands, then back to his face. In the few days she'd known him, Yates Blackburn had shown her more kindness, more respect, and more genuine care than any man she'd ever met. He had rescued her not just from Walsh, but from a life without purpose or connection. "I think," she said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, "that I've already found where I belong." The hope that dawned in Yates's eyes warmed her more than the nearby fire. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated." Madeline silenced him by squeezing his hand. "When I left Philadelphia, I was looking for a new beginning, a place where I could be more than just someone's daughter or someone's wife. I wanted to find out who Madeline Avery really is." She looked around at the ranch, at the people celebrating around them. "I think I've found her here. And I've found something else I wasn't even looking for." "What's that?" Yates asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone who sees me really sees me and values what he sees," Madeline replied softly. "Someone I could build a life with if he's willing to be patient while I learn about ranching and the West." Yates's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I have a feeling you'll learn faster than most. You're already handier with a skillet than many who have lived here their whole lives." Madeline laughed, the sound light and free in a way she hadn't felt since before her parents' deaths. "Is that all you value me for? My skill with cookware?" "Not even close," Yates murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "May I?" Madeline nodded, her heart racing as he leaned in and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. Around them, the celebration continued, but they were in a world of their own, connected by something that had begun in the dust of the Arizona territory and grown into something neither had expected to find. When they finally parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you that ranching isn't an easy life. There are droughts and blizzards, rustlers and wolves, and 1,000 other challenges." "I'm not afraid of challenges," Madeline assured him, "not anymore." Over the weeks that followed, Walsh and his remaining men were tried and sentenced to lengthy prison terms for their crimes. Madeline's testimony was crucial in ensuring that justice was served, and she stood tall in the courtroom, facing her former captors without flinching. Yates was by her side throughout, his quiet support giving her the strength she needed. Life at the Blackburn Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Madeline threw herself into learning everything she could about ranching, much to Mrs. Pearson's amusement and Yates's admiration. She proved to be a quick study, soon able to ride competently, help with simple ranch tasks, and even assist during the seasonal cattle drive. The neighboring families who had stood with them against Walsh became dear friends, especially the Thorntons. Mary Thornton took particular delight in teaching Madeline the skills she would need as a rancher's wife, for it was clear to everyone that was where things were headed. 3 months after Walsh's capture, on a perfect autumn evening with the mountains blazing gold and red in the sunset, Yates took Madeline riding to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. They dismounted and spread a blanket on the ground, sharing a simple picnic as they watched the day's last light fade from the sky. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Yates asked as they sat side by side, his arm around her shoulders. Madeline considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, the libraries, the concerts, some of the conveniences of city life, but I don't miss who I was there or the life I would have had." She looked up at him. "I belong here now." Yates nodded, something in his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they decided to come west to start a new life together." He opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It's not fancy like the jewelry you probably had back east. It's beautiful," Madeline interrupted sincerely. "Truly." Yates took a deep breath. "Madeline Avery, I never expected to find you bruised and barefoot in the dirt that day, but finding you changed everything for me. I love you, your courage, your intelligence, your determination. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Madeline's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, respect, and love. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling so widely their cheeks hurt. "Mrs. Pearson will be insufferable when she hears the news," Yates joked. "She's been planning our wedding since the day you arrived." "Mary Thornton, too," Madeline laughed. "She told me weeks ago that she was just waiting for you to get up the courage to propose." "Was I that obvious?" Yates asked, looking slightly chagrined. Madeline kissed him lightly. "Only to everyone with eyes." They were married a month later in the small church in town, with Marshall Dawson, the Thorntons, and all their neighbors in attendance. Madeline wore a simple white dress that Mary had helped her make, and Yates wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Madeline's breath caught when she first saw him waiting at the altar. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a sense of community that Madeline had never experienced in her previous life. As the evening wore on, she found herself standing on the porch, looking out at the celebration, a sense of wonder washing over her. Yates joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, his voice warm with love. "More than I ever imagined possible," Madeline replied truthfully. "Sometimes I think about how different things would be if you hadn't found me that day. If you hadn't stopped and lifted me onto your horse. I couldn't have ridden past you," Yates said simply. "Not then, not ever." "I know," Madeline turned in his arms to face him. "That's who you are, Yates Blackburn. The kind of man who stops to help, who fights for what's right, who builds something lasting and true." She placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. "The kind of man I'm proud to call my husband." Yates covered her hand with his own. "And you're the kind of woman I'm proud to call my wife, brave enough to start again, strong enough to face your fears, and generous enough to share your life with a rough-around-the-edges rancher." "Not so rough," Madeline teased, reaching up to straighten his collar. "Though I do think I prefer you in your everyday clothes rather than this fancy suit." "That's convenient," Yates replied with a grin, "since the suit will be going back in the trunk after today." As the party continued around them, Madeline and Yates stood together on the porch of the home they now shared, looking out at the life they would build together. The path that had brought them to this moment had been unexpected and often difficult, but neither would have changed it. From bruised and barefoot in the dirt to beloved and cherished as a bride, Madeline's journey had led her not just to safety, but to happiness and belonging. And Yates, who had spent years building a ranch but missing the essential element that would make it a home, had found the missing piece in the woman he'd rescued that fateful day. Under the star-filled Arizona sky, their new life together was just beginning, a life built on courage, respect, and a love that had been forged in adversity and would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. In the years that followed, the Blackburn Ranch prospered and grew. Yates's skill with cattle and Madeline's head for business proved to be a formidable combination. They expanded their holdings, built a larger house as their family grew, and became respected leaders in the community. 2 years after their wedding, Madeline gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Yates's mother. 2 years later came a son, James, who had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The children grew up strong and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, absorbing the values their parents lived by every day. Marshall Dawson retired and was succeeded by a younger man who often sought Yates's counsel on matters related to the territory's growing ranching industry. The Thorntons' daughter married one of the Johnson brothers, creating an even stronger bond between the neighboring ranches. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Madeline and Yates would sit on their porch, watching the stars emerge above their land, their fingers intertwined. "You ever wonder about coincidence?" Madeline asked on one such evening, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "If I hadn't been on that particular stagecoach, if Walsh hadn't attacked it, if you hadn't been riding in that exact place at that exact time." "I don't believe it was coincidence," Yates replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think I was always meant to find you." Madeline smiled, thinking of the bruised and desperate woman she had been and the confident, contented woman she had become. "Then I'm very glad you did." From tragedy had come triumph, from fear had come courage, and from a chance encounter in the dust of the Arizona territory had come a love story that would be told in their family for generations to come, the tale of a woman who was bruised and barefoot in the dirt, until the cowboy lifted her onto his horse and rode away, taking her not just to safety, but to the place where she truly belonged.